Welcome. This is Najma Minhas and Moeed Pirzada with Global Village Space. Today we're looking at the virtual address that Imran Khan gave to 17 destinations across the UK and Europe and on public screens in Pakistan. Moeed, what was different about today's event?
I think the first thing that was different about today's event, and which makes it very interesting for Pakistani politics, is that the medium itself, like message and messenger, this time it is the medium, because it's the first time in the history of this country that a political leader has addressed the Pakistani diasporas across the UK and Europe at 17 different cities and destinations that included cities as important, large Pakistani concentrations: London, Scotland, Manchester, Birmingham, then also across cities in Italy and other places, and Norway, wherever there are large pockets of Pakistani diaspora. 17 in total. I don't know the names of so many others. So it's a totally different thing. The use of large screens, he has addressed them. The people have arrived there. And the second different thing is this: that many things he's repeated. I think now this is actually becoming a little bit of a problem for many people, because as we had discussed in our last videos in my Urdu vlog and also in the English, that he needs to keep on changing the narrative. He needs to keep on pushing the narrative forward. Today, he still had 80% of the old things, which people, all these people, I mean, people in London, Scotland, Birmingham, in Italy, and Norway had already heard these things. So he has brought newer ideas. I think the newer idea, one thing which he challenged, which was interesting, which was not exactly new, but he challenged the Pakistani media very effectively by asking them in a very rhetorical fashion that why are you not reporting on Mehengai now? In his time period, the media were always on the streets with cameras in their hand, and they're running special shows and programs. And in every program that was being discussed, महंगाई है, मार दिया, आलू की कीमत, टमाटर की कीमत, बिजली के रेट, पेट्रोल के रेट. And now there's almost like a silence of conspiracy from Pakistan's mainstream media. And after his speech and address, I saw PTI leaders coming up with, in fact, a list of the increase in the prices that happened in the past 24 hours. Because the prices of essential commodities are increasing in every 24 to 48 hours, and mainstream media is not mentioning them. The commentators are not talking about it. The government is not admitting it. It's barely being talked on social media. So I think this is a new thing which he said. And
So it's a
then,
new strategy that PTI is adopting, that they want to talk about how things have become more expensive in the last 6 weeks or 7 weeks.
yes, and also that
How does this relate to the diaspora Pakistani?
yes, the other thing is that he has told the diasporas, which I think is which we expected, which we had discussed in our vlogs, that he asks them that you can help. He says, "How can you help you? I have a request to you," and he says, "You need to approach your politicians. You need to approach the editors of the. If you cannot do anything else, at least you can write the letters to the editors. You can write letters to the politicians. You can meet the politicians, and you can do in the next 2 weeks. You can continue to do demonstrations at key places to take the message home." And then he also, because in order to explain as to what the people have to do, he said that look, the problem, which is a rehash of the old thing, he said the problem has been that Pakistan's Ashrafiya, the ruling elite, has been very corrupt. And this ruling elite has this money abroad in Western financial institutions and banks, and their situation is just like that of the Russian oligarchs, which has been
Right.
seen after the Ukraine crisis, the war. And these people can be very easily controllable. And he says this is precisely the crisis Pakistan is facing, and that is why this struggle is very important. He also asks the European and British diasporas that a small money donation from you makes a huge difference here, which makes it pretty obvious that Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf doesn't have the kind of funds which the now the government, the parties which were on the opposition who were running the campaigns and everything. So PTI is always short of funds in the sense that this party doesn't have the backing of very rich people or doesn't have those means of raising the money as many other political parties in Pakistani history have. So
Do
these
you
are some of
think, I mean, these are some of the key messages, and I'll go back to the first message which you talked about, which is he's starting to mention how expensive things are in Pakistan. Do you think this is in relation to the fact that so many overseas Pakistanis send money back to Pakistan? So he's actually assuring them or trying to emphasize this point that things are getting very expensive back home and they need to get worried about this on a personal level when they think of their families back in Pakistan as well.
Maybe, but I don't think this was precisely the message. I think he was really raising the question and exposing the hypocrisy of the Pakistani media. He was also trying to prove that Pakistan's major media houses, apart from one or two networks, have actually been part of the plan or the plot or the conspiracy to change the regime in this country. But I think that the main idea was to basically energize the diasporas to reach out to the communities that can then influence the Western
He also
politics.
gave the example of Mosaddegh with reference to the media houses, when he talked about the media houses. He gave the reference to Mosaddegh to say this is how in 1953-54 Mosaddegh's government was brought down, and the first thing they did was they invested in the media. So it's in that context that he referred to
Just
these
to
things as well.
clarify, you are referring to, and he was referring to Mohammad Mosaddegh, the Iranian popularly
Prime
elected prime
Minister,
minister
yes.
in 1952-53. That was, now it is declassified, that how British intelligence agency MI6 and the US intelligence agency CIA, in fact, the principal role was played by CIA, had actually influenced the Iranian media. They bought the Iranian media, they collected a crowd, they shaped a narrative of incompetence against Mohammad Mosaddegh. And the basic issue which we now know and the whole world knows anywhere in the Western world, and no one can deny this, the issue was actually nationalization of the Standard Oil Company, the Anglo-British or British
Right. So the
Anglo-Estonian.
Iranians were going to kick the British out of Iran. But do you think there was a reason? Because he went through it in detail. He went through and said this was the first step they took to remove him. This was the second step. And he referred to the political parties. He referred to the fact that political leaders within Mossadegh's own party were bought. So he went through it step by step. Why was he going in so much detail on Mossadegh's case for the overseas Pakistanis? What was it that he wanted them to understand?
I think he wanted to explain that how his government has been overthrown through an interplay of several players and political actors. But I also want to come that how effective this communication will be. Whereas it has resonated with the Pakistani diasporas, he also mentioned his cancer hospital, his days in cricket, that how he has always been loved and he received the affection and the support of the Pakistani diasporas across UK, Europe, everywhere in the world. But just let me explain the significance and the non-significance of it. So he is indebted to them. They have helped him in his political campaign. They support him. He has been fighting and advocating the right of the overseas Pakistanis right to vote in their constituencies in the forthcoming election. But I think there is a principal thing which is not happening. The actual battleground is Washington. The actual battleground is United States. Imran Khan has to find a way, and I can give an idea. Imran Khan has to find a way to reach to the American public. He has to speak to America. And now, how can he do that? The problem is this: at this particular moment in Pakistan's history and US Pakistan relationship, the mainstream channels that look toward their own establishment, like CNN, CBS, Fox, and the other channels, even Al Jazeera English, will not oblige him. In the first instance, I suspect that given his rhetoric, they are not going to interview him. They're not going to grant him an interview. Because I had heard a few weeks ago that Becky Anderson or someone will interview him and it has not materialized. So, I mean, they're not interested, they're not showing interest. Even if they do, let's say the PTI basically requests them very hard, literally begs them, they will do a very hard interview. They will actually not let him speak, they will not let him explain, they will actually question every single dot and comma in what he says. So, I think that he cannot reach the American public through the CNN or through the mainstream American media. However,
why does he need to reach the American public?
Because you see, what is not understood in Pakistan and what can be understood by anyone like you who has lived extensively across the United States on more than one occasion, we all need to understand this thing. And anyone who is hearing us across United States, that there is not one America, there is not one United States. There are multiple United States, multiple Americas, and most Americans do not even know what is happening in Pakistan. Pakistan and South Asian relationship or US-Pakistan relationship is a very specialized subject. There will probably be less than 50 people or maybe 50 or 60 people in Washington and Beltway politics, another 10, 15 in New York. that seriously follow the events in Pakistan, the ex-ambassadors, the think tankers, some people, professors or associate professors in the universities. So the American public doesn't know, and the American public, I mean, even Pakistan is a large country. Even Pakistan is 220 million people that are split. I mean, not everyone even votes in this country. So PTI probably got a support of 32, 33% of the Pakistan's registered voters in 2018 and became the largest political party. And you can imagine 17, 18% for PMLN. So there was 70% of the registered voters that have not voted for PTI, and they have not even voted for the election. So such a large percentage, 50%. Within United States, there are so many communities, so many professional classes. There's so many segments of American society. There is a progressive left, there's progressive America, there are professional classes, there are so many different classes, academia, who can be approached. Now, how Imran Khan can approach? CNN is not going to oblige him. Uh, what he can actually do is that in the major centers of Pakistani population, like the Washington itself, Houston, New York, Chicago, and some of the other places, they can collect the Pakistani community, the the Americans of Pakistani origin, or the residents, even the students over there. There can be multiple screens across different cities where 500 or 1,000 or some people can come. And PTI can send them a message that everyone is supposed to bring or should try to bring at least one American mainstream friend that is not of the Pakistani origin. That can be of Hispanic origin, that can be an Afro American, that can be a mainstream white American, that can be an Indian. They have to bring people along with them, even the families along with them.
And
And
what
this
is that supposed to accomplish?
let me explain. And they should also request them to bring the local reporters, because America's mainstream papers are only two or three mainstream papers, and then there's smaller papers while the mainstream papers might not be interested, the smaller papers and the journalists and the editors might actually be interested in what this man who is so agitated, and why there is an rising anti-Americanism or suspicion in Pakistan. So he should,
Why
and
do
then
they care though? Why? I mean, why would the average American care? What has he got to do with American foreign policy? Since when have American policymakers ever involved the average white or Hispanic or Black American?
see, look, it's true that American foreign policy is not being made by the American public, but American public lives in a democratic structure. They are physically independent, even if there is a manufactured consent, like Chomsky had once written a book. Noam Chomsky had written a book, Manufacturing Consent. But if the American public are touched by a newer idea, it will create a certain kind of impact. If 1,000 plus 2,000, 3,000 people are listening in Washington, and they have American friends, and Pakistanis are Americans too, then there are other crowds in New York, or maybe in Boston, in Houston, in Chicago. This will actually travel out. And then American media will also cover it a bit, that Pakistani ex-former prime minister has actually created a pulse, or he has basically thrown up these ideas. Now, his message, which he has been continuously regurgitating in Pakistan, in Jalsa after Jalsa, and 80% of which was regurgitated once again while talking to the diasporas across UK and Europe, is not going to work in United States. The common average American is not familiar with Imran Khan, for the reason that Imran Khan became a celebrity in UK and many other cricketing countries like Australia and New Zealand because of cricket and because of a smaller nature of those countries.
One
United States,
interesting message that I think he gave to even to the European and the UK diaspora was that he asked them that you all live in societies where these kind of people would never have been elected. Your systems and your institutions would never have allowed corrupt individuals to be people's representatives for a country. And he talked about the functioning institutions in those countries. And I think that's something Americans can relate to. If you sell them that story, you have to sell them the story of how democracy involves institutions and why it's important to actually work on the basis of those institutions.
thank you so much. I mean, this is precisely thanks for adding this point, that he reminded them that, look, you are operating in democratic societies, rule of law societies, and in these societies, the convention is if someone is accused in a public office of corruption, then it is not a matter of the High Court and Supreme Court and a tribunal to decide, and he will continue to have in the politics. Anyone who has an accusation which he is unable to explain in a public space, like he himself explained the issue of the Tosha Khana. He has in a very black and white fashion, he and his party have explained the issue of the Tosha Khana gifts. So, I mean, that satisfies the public opinion. And there's so many other instances, I mean, about his Banigala house and so on. In Pakistan, the refuges, the excuses that unless a court basically finds me guilty, then I have to have a right of appeal in the High Court, then I have a right of appeal in the Supreme Court, then I have probably a right of review. And so the Pakistani politics has totally been paralyzed by the accusations of mega corruption. So he has created that distinction, and that distinction can work across United States. I mean, corruption charge is even a bigger issue in United States than perhaps Europe, right? So, but I think that his message, the kind of message he's actually giving, he has to recalibrate. He has to work on his message. As I mentioned, the battle is in Washington. There are two battlegrounds. There are two principally battlegrounds. One is in Pakistani public opinion, which is standing by him, which believes that his government has been removed through a clandestine conspiracy, and he has created and generated a pulse, a very strong public opinion, which is now a reality, and everyone is feeling the pressure of the public opinion. When you look at Mohatma Mariam Nawaz Sahiba doing two jalsas in 2 days, 2 or 3 days, then you look at the current Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif Sahab holding a jalsa in Bisham in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, thanks to Amir Muqam, and then you also see that Shahbaz Sharif was literally emulating two characters from Pakistani history. One was Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, which he has always emulated throughout 90s. He's very impressed of his way of speech. And second was, in fact, Imran Khan, because he would ask people the questions like Imran Khan does, and he would ask them, and the crowd was tutored. It didn't look like a very natural and organic crowd. But the bottom line is this: these jalsas by Mariam Nawaz and by Shahbaz Sharif show that the government is coming under pressure, or someone is coming under pressure, that is creating the ideas to Mohammad Mariam Nawaz Sahiba that you need to basically get out. But it's not really working in the same way. So the Pakistani public stands by him, but the real battleground, apart from the hearts and minds of the Pakistani public, the battleground is Washington, the Beltway politics. There, the message has to go that something is happening in Pakistan that has unnecessarily created a pulse and a wave of anti-Americanism.
Is
No
that why
American.
he's reaching out to the diaspora Pakistanis? Because, they're a really small percentage. They can't even vote in Pakistan. I mean, technically, they've made life so difficult for people to vote. So it always confuses me. Why is he so involved with the diaspora Pakistani? I mean, to some extent, he answered it himself as well. He said, I've spent 18, 20 years outside my country. I've been a diaspora Pakistani. I've been an overseas Pakistani. So he mentioned and referred to that. But what is the value of the diaspora Pakistani to him?
See, I can only analyze because he hasn't really explained it very well. But I think from whatever he has said in the several jalsas speeches for the past, almost 4 years now, before coming into power and afterwards, first of all, he has an emotional bond and a relationship with the Pakistani diasporas. They stood up for him not only in cricket as a celebrity, but I think the amount of the funds and donation and the fund mobilization which he has done for making the cancer hospitals, first in Lahore and then in Peshawar, and then those cancer hospitals need a lot of money because almost 50% or some percentage, significant percentage of people are being treated in these cancer hospitals free of cost. So I think a large chunk of the money is being generated by affluent Pakistani diasporas because of the disparity conversion rate between the pound dollar and the Deutsche Mark or the euro and this euro. So I think every year. Thanks for correcting me. I mean, I was thinking of the Deutsche Mark,
You're
of
still
course.
stuck in the 1990s, Moeed.
99. So, in euros. So, I mean, look, a pound is 225 rupees, a dollar is, I think, 185, 86 rupees. So, I think these cancer hospitals are raising more than ₹1 billion or much more than that every year, and he's indebted to them. But he also, I think, thinks, and many other people around him, like Asad Umar, for instance, they also think that the Pakistani diaspora is a continuation of the Pakistani nation. In this day and age of technology, media, interconnectivity, the Pakistani diasporas are a soul and a spirit, and they should be part of the Pakistani politics. Now, there are some very strategic reasons as well, which actually frightens the PMLN and the PPP politicians, and which is this: that according to the Constitution of Pakistan and the laws of Pakistan, these Pakistani diasporas, which are almost 10 million above the age of 18, reportedly, that means 10 million potential voters, have to vote in their own constituencies. And as you had interviewed Salman Shabir in from Australia, who has been working on it and has filed more than one petition in Pakistani court for the rights of the Pakistani overseas Pakistanis vote, he had pointed out in the discussion to me that this overseas vote can influence 176 constituencies. That is why when PPP, PMLN talk of the electoral reform, they want to convert the Pakistani diaspora vote into few constituencies. They want them to have, say, one constituency of UK, or maybe two constituencies of UK, one for Europe, or two for Europe, and one for United States, three for United States. They don't want to give them the right to vote in Pindi, Islamabad, Jhelum, Mansehra, Karachi, or whatever, which
right.
are there.
They're worried about the impact, the marginal impact of the overseas voter.
I want to come back to the United States, because I think the message which Imran Khan has been continuously repeating in Pakistan, and even repeated today to the European diasporas, is not going to work, will be a flop, and would fail if he speaks to the American diasporas, because ultimately that would be picked up, especially if he does the same kind of communication issues.
Okay, so what are the key messages he needs to give to the United States diaspora?
He needs to basically come up with a message. First of all, who is going to craft that message? I don't see many people in his party around him able to craft that message. So I think he has to call my namesake, Dr. Moeed Yusuf, who is probably a very greatly positioned to create that message. And maybe Dr. Moeed Yusuf, I don't know if he's still willing or he has disappeared somewhere. But if Dr. Moeed Yusuf is not available, but in any case, it should not be alone to Dr. Moeed Yusuf. I think some ex-ambassadors and foreign secretaries who have worked in United States in the past 10, 15 years, especially in the past 10, 15 years, they need to be approached by Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf and Imran Khan's team. They can also be deputy chief of missions like DCMs, and they need to craft a message which is both populist and strategic. So the message, here are the main bullet points of the message: that United States and Pakistan have stood together in very difficult times, for the past 70 years and so. But it has always been a very difficult relationship because Pakistan's interests have not always been coinciding with United States' interests. At times, United States and Pakistan had very similar interests during the Cold War, then during the Afghanistan first war after 1979. But Pakistan also has its own interest, which this political party and leader wants the American people and the American governments to understand. And there have been series of misunderstandings and missteps in this communication, in which the powers or the Biden administration or the administrations or the establishment in Washington has totally misread the situation, has misunderstood the situation. For instance, Pakistan's approach towards Russia, which was not something. First of all,
he clarified that, by the way, in the Jalsa. Once again, the virtual address. He mentioned that it was an ongoing process for decades.
Yes, look, he did. But what I'm saying is that 80% of his Pakistani speech, which he repeated, or maybe 75%, he has to revamp the whole speech. If he the survival of his politics, the survival of his politics and survival of Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf as a political party depends to a huge extent. Whereas it depends 50, 60, 70% on the Pakistani public, it also depends 30%, 35% upon the pulse he generates with the progressive United States, with the left-leaning United States, with the second tier and tertiary press of the United States. That here is a former prime minister, popular prime minister, that had raised 30,000 people in an arena in Washington in 2019, and who can collect and assemble several thousand American residents and Americans of Pakistani origin across 5 different cities or 6 different cities. This is basically speaking to the American public and to the American media. And he's saying that, look, guys, we are not fighting against you. There are misunderstandings. There are serious misunderstandings. And this repeat of the word Donald Lu, for God's sake, this is blasphemy, because an average American doesn't even know, he doesn't even have the slightest of understanding that Pakistan is so subordinate to United States that someone, Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia, can dictate the terms. So he has to craft a different language, that how the American government has sent an ultimatum to Pakistan, how the Pakistan's media and Pakistani political parties have played into the trick, and how this is against the American values. Americans stand for democracy. The Americans stand for the democratic right and freedom of expression of the Pakistani people. They stand for the right of the Pakistani people to select their own governments. This is the kind of message he has to craft, and this has to be in English. This has to be in English. So he
Right.
has to create a scripted message. He doesn't have
Should
to.
he wear a suit as well?
Should he wear what?
I said, should he wear a suit as well? Do you want
No,
him to
no,
wear
no, no,
jeans?
no, 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 no. This don't. I mean, this is not at all. Not at all. No suit. I mean, suit is immaterial. But language is important because because if he's speaking to the, I mean, in the first place, the many a significant percentage of Pakistan's second generation or third generation, this is the third generation of Pakistanis. I mean, people who had migrated from Pakistan massively in 1960s. This is the third generation. So the third generation is not very comfortable with
But
Urdu language.
it's interesting. You've just thrown aside my suggestion, but all marketing research actually shows when you want to get your message across, you need to be like the people, right? So, yes, when he wants to get his messaging across to Pakistanis in Pakistan, wear shalwar kameez. But if you're specifically telling you, and maybe I'm saying this tongue in cheek, but if you're specifically telling him he needs to give messaging out to the second, third generation Pakistani diaspora in the United States, and their American friends, their white American friends, their Hispanic American friends, their Black American friends, what's wrong with him wearing a pair of jeans or wearing shorts or wearing something that gets the message across to them?
Look,
I'm sorry.
no. I agree and I disagree with you. I disagree on the suit thing. Knowing a little bit about Imran Khan, which everyone knows, he's not going to put up a black jacket and suit, but he can definitely put up a shirt. He can put up a white shirt. He can put up. He can wear a jeans, and when he's speaking, perhaps his jeans would not be visible. Apart from the fact that when the camera pans open in the beginning, he can wear a jeans. I mean, he wears jeans anyway. I mean, well, of course. I mean, if on your suggestion he wears a jean, then Mohtama Mariam Nawaz Sahiba and Mohtama Mariam Aurangzeb Sahiba and the whole PML and maybe People's Party will start crying and shouting. But he wears jeans. I mean, I met him 3 days ago. He was wearing a jeans. I mean, people have met him so many times wearing a jeans, and he's someone who used to do the cabinet meetings wearing a jeans and a t-shirt, and at times it was also criticized. So wearing a t-shirt and a jeans is not a problem for him at all. Wearing a suit will be a little bit look artificial for him because I don't remember him wearing a suit in the past
No,
three
I
plus years.
understand. It was just a tongue-in-cheek comment. So you're basically saying he needs to work on his messaging and make it specific to the diaspora in the United States.
No, not only to the diaspora. Look, when a politician of his stature speaks, like Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif was speaking today, a politician, when it addresses a crowd anywhere, is not only addressing that crowd. A
Right.
politician is talking to the media. A politician is talking to the government, to the opposition. A politician is talking to the whole world, right? So whenever he speaks in the jalsas, he's speaking to Pakistani opposition, to the Pakistani media, to the Pakistani diasporas, to the American establishment, to the American Foreign Office, to the State Department. He's speaking to at multiple layers of the people and to the Pakistani establishment for that matter. So when he will address the Pakistani diasporas along with their American friends, the American friends are very important. And Americans are very friendly people, as you know it, and as I know it, and everyone who hears it and who has lived in the United States. Americans are very, very, very friendly people. I mean, nowhere on the planet Earth a common man is more friendly towards other people. And if Pakistani people, students, for instance, or the families would request their American friends to come, several people would come. So that is why he has to speak English, because otherwise, how would he be translated? Either they would dub him in Urdu or they will subtitle that into English, and that's not going to work. And he is an excellent speaker in English. Yes, he has his nationalism, hyper nationalism. He doesn't speak in English, but of course, when he met Trump, was he speaking to Trump in Urdu? He wasn't, speaking to Trump in Urdu. So he needs to craft a message, and he needs to deliver it in English. And there should be like 6, 7, 8, 10 major U.S. cities, and at least 2 or 3 of them should be around the Beltway politics. I think it should be Maryland, it should be Alexandria, it should be DC itself. It should be New York, it should be Chicago, it should be Boston. Maybe there should be screens in universities. I mean, there are hundreds of Pakistani students in Columbia, hundreds of Pakistani students in between Yale, Harvard, and Tufts, and hundreds of Pakistani students in the other universities. So maybe there should be. It's an expensive proposition to have this kind of satellite connectivity, but I'm sure they can afford it. and no one can stop them. This is the democratic right to talk to the diasporas over there. But the message has to be crafted. The message is this: that look, we have always stood through difficult times with the United States, but we have our own difficult strategic interest. We have a difficult relationship with India. We have a difficult situation facing in Afghanistan. We face two insurgencies. I mean, he has to mention this thing, that uh, how which he mentioned even today, by the way. He has to
Yes.
mention this thing, that how General
Pakistan lost
Musharraf.
over 80,000 lives during the war on terror.
Yes. So you see, the point is that he has to bring a concentrated message that between 80,000 to 100,000 Pakistani people died as a result of Pakistan standing by United States, and General Musharraf entered into a slippery path. Initially, it was for logistic support, as he had mentioned, but then gradually turned into Pakistan sending its own crack army forces into Waziristan and other agencies, and that led to a civil war in Pakistan, as a result of which Pakistan was totally destabilized. And then while Pakistan has lost something like 10,000 law enforcement officers from the armed forces of Pakistan, from the Rangers, from the FC, from the police, I think there are about 30,000 Pakistani officers and Jawans that have lost their limbs. I mean, they had faced amputations, or lost an eye, or lost a body part, or something like this. So he has to basically tell them, and he cannot tell them in a CNN interview, because they would never like him to categorically tell these things, because they will give him only 90 seconds or 60 seconds. He can formulate an address, he can speak, and this address will then come onto YouTube, it will come onto Facebook, it will come onto Twitter, the chunks of it, and then people can. So he has to speak to the America, he has to speak to the multiple layer American society, and I'm sure that's going to work. As my sense is, I don't have the exact information. My sense is this, that the drama that is happening in Pakistan is a dummy show. The real thing is happening in Washington. So that is why we hear that Bilawal Zardari Bhutto, is being planned to send him to Washington. Why is he being sent to Washington? He's being sent as a young, educated face of Pakistan, of a new regime that has taken over. So I think the people here are also desperate, and he also has to be desperate. If he thinks that just by bringing crowds and blocking Islamabad, he can change everything, he cannot, unless there is a pulse in Washington. There are some people talking in the town in New York, Washington, Boston. Hey guys, what's really happening in Pakistan? They don't know anything about Pakistan. So it is his responsibility, it is his obligation, it is his political challenge to take his voice to Washington.
Thank you, Moeed, for sharing your thoughts with us again today.
Thank you.